The smell of lilies and grief hung heavy in the air at Peaceful Meadows Funeral Home as I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, watching my family argue over my mother's final arrangements. The irony wasn't lost on me that even in death, Maria Elena Martinez couldn't escape their condescending voices and dismissive attitudes. "Sofia needs to understand her place," my uncle Roberto declared, his expensive suit catching the fluorescent lights as he gestured toward me. At 45, he'd always been the family's self-appointed patriarch, ever since my father died when I was 12. This isn't child's play. Funeral arrangements require mature decision-making. I adjusted my simple black dress, purchased from a department store, not the boutique where my cousin Carmen bought her designer morning attire, and said nothing. Let them think what they wanted. Let them see the modest Honda Civic in the parking lot next to Roberto's BMW and Carmen's Mercedes. Let them assume I was still the struggling single mother they'd written off years ago. My Aunt Isabel nodded sagely from her position near the casket display. "Sofia, dear, perhaps you should let Roberto handle the financial aspects. We know money's been tight since the divorce." The divorce. 3 years ago, when I'd finally left my cheating ex-husband and moved into a small apartment with my 10-year-old daughter Luna. 3 years of them assuming I was barely scraping by, working my little computer job as they called it, while they lived their country club lives and sent their children to private schools. "The bronze casket is more appropriate," Roberto continued, pointing to a mid-range option. "We need to maintain the family's dignity, but within reasonable financial constraints." Carmen, his daughter, examined her manicured nails. "Dad's right. We can't have people thinking we're cheap, but we also can't bankrupt poor Sofia trying to keep up appearances." Poor Sofia. I bit back a smile and checked my phone discreetly. 3 text messages from my business partner Marcus. Peaceful Meadows acquisition approved. Documents ready for signature. Congratulations on the $47 million purchase. If they only knew that their poor Sofia had spent the last 3 years building a business empire while they dismissed her as a failure. That the little computer job had grown into a tech consulting firm managing digital infrastructure for major corporations across the Southwest. That I'd been quietly acquiring assets, including several businesses in our hometown, while they were too busy pitying me to notice. The funeral director, Mr. Henderson, approached our group with practiced solemnity. "Have we reached a decision on the arrangements?" "Yes." Roberto stood assuming control. "The bronze casket, standard service, plot in Section C. Nothing too elaborate." I finally spoke up. "Actually, I'd like to see the premium options." The room fell silent. Roberto's eyebrows raised in that familiar patronizing way. "Sofia, be realistic. The bronze casket is perfectly respectable. Let the adults handle this," he added with a dismissive wave. "You can barely pay rent." I nodded quietly, pulling out the folder I'd brought. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like to discuss the arrangements privately." Roberto scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Sofia, you can't afford." "Perhaps we should hear what she has to say," Mr. Henderson interrupted gently, though I caught him glancing at the paperwork in my hands. I handed him the documents. His eyes widened as he read, then looked up at me with new understanding. "Of course, Ms. Martinez. Right this way." As we walked toward his office, I heard Roberto mutter to Isabel, "She's being delusional. Someone needs to stop her before she embarrasses us all." In the privacy of Mr. Henderson's office, I spread out the contracts on his mahogany desk. Purchase agreements, financial statements, corporate documentation. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed them. "Ms. Martinez, I had no idea you were the buyer. The board mentioned the sale was to a private equity firm. Phoenix Holdings," I confirmed. "Buy company. The acquisition of Peaceful Meadows Memorial Parks includes all 7 locations across the state, correct?" He nodded, still processing. "Yes, and the associated crematoriums, monument companies and floral services. It's quite an extensive operation." "Good. Now about my mother's arrangements." When we returned to the main room, my family was examining casket prices with calculator apps on their phones, trying to determine what they thought I could afford. Luna sat quietly in the corner, reading a book, wise beyond her years and used to her relatives' dismissive attitudes toward both of us. "Uncle Roberto," I called out, "we need to finalize the arrangements." He turned, his expression already prepared for disappointment. Sophia, I hope you've come to your senses. The bronze casket is. Actually, Mr. Henderson interrupted, his professional smile returning. Ms. Martinez just purchased our entire Memorial Park chain. The acquisition was finalized this morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Carmen's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on the marble floor. Isabel's hand flew to her throat. Roberto's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I'm sorry, what? Carmen managed to whisper. Mr. Henderson continued, clearly enjoying the moment. Phoenix Holdings, Ms. Martinez's company, now owns Peaceful Meadows Memorial Parks, all 7 locations, plus our associated businesses. The transaction was valued at $47 million. Roberto sank into a nearby chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking less impressive. That's impossible. Sophia works in computers. I build digital infrastructure systems for Fortune 500 companies, I corrected quietly. Have been for 3 years. Phoenix Holdings manages technology integration for major corporations, with contracts across 12 states. I pulled out my tablet showing them our client list. Names they recognized, companies they'd heard of, contracts worth millions. While you were all assuming I was struggling, I was building something real. Isabel found her voice first. But your apartment, your car. You live so modestly. I finished. Yes. Because I learned something after the divorce. Image isn't wealth. Showing off isn't success. Building something lasting is. Carmen was frantically Googling Phoenix Holdings on her phone. It says here, Tio Sofia Martinez. Estimated company value. $180 million, I supplied. As of last quarter's evaluation. Luna looked up from her book, smiling slightly. She was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who'd seen me working late into the night, building contracts, growing the business. She'd also been the only one to ask real questions about my work instead of dismissing it. Roberto struggled to regain his composure. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Think what? I asked calmly. That because I didn't remarry immediately, I must be failing? That because I chose to live below my means, I must not have any means? You never asked about my work, Roberto. You just assumed. I turned to Mr. Henderson. For my mother's arrangements, I'd like the platinum service. The mahogany casket with the bronze details. And I'd like to discuss establishing a memorial garden in her honor. Of course, Ms. Martinez. We can design something beautiful. Carmen was still staring at her phone screen. Dad, it says here that Phoenix Holdings just acquired 3 other major companies this year. Sophia's been featured in Business Weekly as one of the Southwest's most innovative tech entrepreneurs. The irony was perfect. They'd spent years dismissing my achievements while reading business magazines that featured my success, never bothering to connect the dots because they'd already decided who I was. There's something else, I continued, pulling out another folder. The land adjacent to the Memorial Park. I purchased that as well. I'm planning to develop it into a technology campus. It'll bring about 800 high-paying jobs to the area. Isabel gripped her purse tighter. 800 jobs? The mayor's already approved the development. Groundbreaking is next month. I smiled slightly. I thought it would be a fitting tribute to Mom's memory. She always believed in building something that would last. Roberto finally found his voice again. Sophia, we had no idea. We thought we were helping. Helping? I raised an eyebrow. Like when you told people at the country club that I was going through a rough patch? Or when you suggested I might need financial assistance for Luna's school supplies? Carmen flinched. She'd been the one to suggest setting up a fund for Luna's education, assuming I couldn't afford private school. Meanwhile, Luna attended one of the state's most prestigious academies on a full merit scholarship I'd helped arrange through my corporate connections. We were worried about you, Isabel protested weakly. No, I said firmly. You were comfortable with me failing. It made your own lives feel more secure, more important. The successful relative is supposed to be Carmen, right? The one with the MBA and the investment firm job. Carmen's face reddened. She worked for a mid-level investment firm, managing other people's portfolios while struggling to manage her own student loan debt. Nothing wrong with that except for the way the family had always held her up as the success story while dismissing my achievements. Luna closed her book and walked over to me. Mom, should I tell them about the scholarship foundation? I looked down at my daughter, so proud of her maturity and intelligence. What foundation, Mija? The one you started for kids whose parents work in technology. You've been helping pay for their education anonymously. She smiled. Like you helped my friend Jessica's mom when her dad lost his job. Roberto's head was in his hands now. Isabel looked like she might cry. Carmen just stared at me with a mixture of respect and something that might have been envy. How much? Roberto asked quietly. How much what? How much have you been helping people while we thought you needed help? I considered the question. The Scholarship Foundation, the anonymous donations to local charities, the business loans I'd provided to struggling entrepreneurs in our community, the fund I'd established for single mothers pursuing education. About $2 million annually, I said simply. It's important to give back to the community that supports you. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat diplomatically. Ms. Martinez, about the memorial garden. We could incorporate educational elements, perhaps a small library or technology center in your mother's honor. I love that idea. I turned to my family. Mom always said education was the greatest gift you could give someone. She'd appreciate knowing her memorial helps others learn. The arrangements took another hour to finalize. The platinum service, the mahogany casket, a memorial garden with a technology learning center, a scholarship fund in Mom's name. Roberto tried several times to contribute financially, but I politely declined. This was my gift to the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep me in school after Dad died. As we prepared to leave, Carmen approached me hesitantly. Sophia, I owe you an apology. We all do. We've been awful. I studied my cousin, seeing something I hadn't noticed before. Behind the designer clothes and perfect makeup was exhaustion, stress lines that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. How are things at the investment firm? I asked gently. Her composure cracked slightly. Not great. The market's been tough and they're talking about layoffs. My student loans. She trailed off. Are you happy there? The question seemed to surprise her. Happy? I don't know. I thought I was supposed to be. Phoenix Holdings is expanding our financial analysis division, I said quietly. We could use someone with your background. The salary's competitive and we pay off employee student loans as a signing bonus. Her eyes widened. You'd, after how we've treated you? Your family, Carmen. And Mom always said family helps family. But, I added firmly, it would be a real job with real expectations. No special treatment because we're related. Roberto overheard and approached us. Sophia, about what I said earlier. Uncle Roberto, I interrupted. You've spent 3 years assuming I was failing instead of asking how I was succeeding. That needs to change. He nodded slowly. You're right. I let my own prejudices. I'm sorry. I pulled out one more business card, handing it to him. Your construction company's been struggling, hasn't it? His face showed surprise that I knew. How did you? I make it my business to know about local companies when I'm planning developments. The technology campus will need construction partners. Local firms get preference. Roberto stared at the card. You'd consider us after you assumed I couldn't afford a headstone for my own mother? I smiled slightly. Yes, but only if you can do the work. This isn't charity, it's business. As we gathered our things to leave, Luna tugged on my sleeve. Mom, are you going to tell them about the other thing? I looked down at her curious face. What other thing, baby? About buying Grandma's old house back. The one where you grew up. Isabel gasped. The house on Maple Street. But it sold months ago to some investment company. Phoenix Properties, I confirmed. Another subsidiary. I've been renovating it as a surprise for Mom, but... I gestured toward the funeral arrangements we'd just completed. The house where I'd grown up, where Mom had worked so hard to raise me after Dad died, where she'd eventually been forced to sell when medical bills mounted. I'd bought it back 6 months ago, planning to surprise her for her 70th birthday. Instead, it would become part of her memorial legacy. I'm turning it into a community center for single mothers pursuing education, I continued. Mom would have loved that. Roberto was crying now, actual tears running down his cheeks. Sophia, we've been such fools. Yes, I agreed simply. But you can do better. As we walked out to the parking lot, I noticed them looking at my Honda Civic with new eyes. No longer the car of someone who couldn't afford better, but the practical choice of someone who understood that wealth wasn't about showing off. Carmen lingered as the others got into their expensive cars. That job offer, were you serious? Completely. But Carmen, it means working for your younger cousin who you thought was a failure. Can you handle that? She was quiet for a moment. I think I need to learn how to handle a lot of things differently. Luna climbed into the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt. As I started the engine, she looked back at the funeral home where my family was still processing what they'd learned. Mom, do you think they'll be different now? I considered her question as I pulled out of the parking lot. Some of them might be, baby. But that's their choice to make. Are you sad that Grandma won't see the memorial garden? No, Mija. I think she sees everything. And I think she's proud that we're building something that will help other people learn and grow. As we drove home, I thought about the technology campus that would rise next to the memorial park, the jobs it would create, the community center that would help other single mothers achieve their dreams, the scholarship foundation that would grow in Mom's name. Mom had always said that success wasn't about what you accumulated, but what you contributed. She'd worked 3 jobs not for luxury, but to ensure I had opportunities she'd never had. She taught me that education and hard work could overcome any obstacle. My family had spent 3 years assuming I was failing because I didn't flaunt wealth I didn't yet have. They never noticed that I was quietly building something lasting, something that would benefit our entire community. The next morning, local news ran a story about the $47 million Memorial Park acquisition and the planned technology campus. By noon, my phone was buzzing with calls from family members, old friends, and business contacts. But the call that mattered most came from Carmen. Sophia? I've been thinking about what you said. About the job offer. And I'd like to learn more. Not because I need the money, though I do, but because I want to understand how you did this. How you built something real while we were all looking the other way. I smiled, looking out my office window at the city where I'd quietly been making a difference. Come in Monday morning. Bring your resume and your questions. And Carmen? Yes. Bring your work clothes, not your designer suits. We've got an empire to build. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about proving people wrong. They're about proving yourself right in ways that matter. As I hung up the phone and turned back to my computer, I thought about Mom's memorial garden and the technology center that would bear her name. She taught me that success wasn't about what others thought of you, but what you built when no one was watching. And what I'd built while they assumed I was failing would now help countless others achieve their own dreams. The funeral was just the beginning. The real memorial would be the lives changed, the opportunities created, and the community strengthened by what we built together. After all, that's what Mom would have wanted. Not expensive flowers that would fade, but something that would grow and flourish long after we were all gone.